Hi everyone, welcome to session 9 of ServiceNow CIS IRM exam preparation. So in the previous videos we have seen until reviewing different script includes. Now in this video we'll talk about policy record lifecycle. So it starts with the draft, then there is review, awaiting approval, uh, published, retired. All approvers must approve. That's the condition here. Now let's look at a policy record and see the lifecycle. So these are different policy records. The navigation is uh, policy. Policy compliance and then policies. So let's go here and we'll open a record. The prefix is POL. So if you look at a policy record, there is a flow formatter here. Draft, review, awaiting approval, published and retire. That is the life cycle. And compliance user will create a policy in draft state. It is reviewed by compliance manager. Approvers will approve it. As I mentioned, all approvers should approve, and then it goes to published. Then compliance manager can retire it. So if you see here, there are different types: policy, procedure, standard, plan, checklist, framework, template. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 types are there: policy, procedure, standard, plan, checklist, framework, template. And there is a valid from, valid to. Then there is owning group, owner. There is a compliance code that gets rolled up. We have approvers, we have reviewers, and there's, as I mentioned, policies can become hierarchical, which means I can have a parent also as a policy. And there is policy categories. So then we have vulnerability response as one category. Right? And then we have description, we have policy text. Then we have knowledge base, acknowledgement setup, exception setup, activity, and settings. So knowledge base tells us what is the knowledge base article for this policy, and then what is the knowledge base of this policy, then policy template of this policy. Then we have acknowledgement setup. So if you want to set up a campaign, then what information is needed here? The frequency, first acknowledgement, number of days to respond, next acknowledgement, audience, and then reference material for the audience so they can understand what this policy is. Then allow users to decline policy, allow users to request exception. Then we have exception setup. It says maximum exception duration days. Then activity and settings, right? So all that. Then you have policy history. So if you make any edits to the policy, like in terms of versioning, then you can see that here. Then you have entity types. If there is map to the policy, then that, and then there's control objectives for the policy. You can see that here. Then we have approvals that we have received on the policy, then policy exceptions, exempted controls, policies, child policies like content references, acknowledgement campaigns, information objects, and evidence and issues. So these are all the different related lists for this policy. And we have so let's look at the control objectives for this policy. So we have category, we have classification, and then type. And let's go back here. And we have policy life cycle, like exceeds validity date, then default 30 days after the validity date. So then there is a system property called SN compliance policy expire to review timer. So which means if this validity date has passed and it is 30 days, then it will go back to review state. If no reviewers are on the policy, it gets it to draft. That's what happens. Policy authoring workflow using Office 365. So there's a scope that there is a functionality which is available to author policies using Office 365. So it talks about that. It talks about what plugins have to be installed, and then what spokes get installed as part of the plugin to enable the integration, and then what new tables get added and so on. So let's look at one of the tables. Uh, this is the table, GRC document versions, and then there's document access, and then there's tables which get updated, which is policy table. System properties, select a file sharing service to host documents and attachments, set up connection record, assign required roles, and so on. So let me see here. Let's look at the module. Let's see, Office. So I'm trying to look for the system properties. So file share. Okay, I don't see that. So, okay, we'll come to that in a minute. Yeah, I'll check and see how to enable this, but we'll move on. So then we have all these options. Next, we have policy compliance administration GRC properties. What properties are available here? So first, we have total number of questions allowed in same response type, group plus number of questions in one assessment, plus number of assessments. And then we have policy compliance administration properties, number of days after reaching a policy validity date, in which the expired policy will automatically move from published to draft or review state. Default is 30. Default duration for which policy exception can be requested 30 days. How to limit policy approvers to a specific group. So this is a use case. Now here we talk about how to limit policy approvers to a specific group. So basically saying policy approvers here instead of allowing everybody in the organization. If you have to limit it to a specific group, then there's a custom configuration which can be done. That's part of your lab, so you can go through that. And then basically we just add a reference qualifier here and so on. If you go to configure dictionary, so we define a script include which returns a set of users from a group, and that's your reference qualifier configuration. Okay, we don't have to get into specifics, but that's that. Next, we have policy acknowledgement campaign lifecycle. So new, pending acknowledgement, closed and cancelled. Configuration, we create audience, set up campaign, set properties, respond to requests. So compliance manager will create audience, compliance user sets up campaign, compliance admin sets properties, and then compliance reader will respond to requests and status. Then create audience, you can create users, groups, and user filters. The table structure is policy, extends document table, acknowledgement campaign extends task table. So this is the table name. Let's go to that. So it's DB object. And here, so if you look at this table, acknowledgement campaign, look at the schema map. We can see it extends tasks, right? That's that. Then we have acknowledgement, which is nothing but SN policy, compliance policy acknowledgement instance. That's the table name. Then we have audience, SN compliance audience. Then we have sys user reference. There's a M2M with between audience and user, audience to groups, and then audience to audience filters, 3 of them. Then you have policy exception. Start, you request a policy exception, a business user can do it. There's a verification rule, there's approval rule, and then this can be done from self-service employee center or compliance workspace or policy exceptions module or control objective record. And then you have issue record, issues in draft overrated can't be selected, enable other apps by registering them with integration registry. So that's that. So then we have tables like integration registry. Let's talk about that. So GRC based exceptions, no integration needed. Non-GRC app exceptions required. Integration register is required. So target table, entity mapping, exception questionnaire, not available, optional, questions, conditions, verification rules by application, users or groups, optional, uh, approval rules, again, conditional users and groups. So that's about that. And then policy exception flows. These are the flows which are available. Generate initial approvals for policy exception. Trigger is based on substate. So there's a substate field. Substate is set based on a business rule, set policy exception substate, and generate verification based on info and verification rule record. Exception request submitted via service portal bypasses approval. Workflow policy exception runs to set control access to exception as exempt. 80% of exception period generates an event for notification. Exception period passes 80%. Requester can submit extension. If valid to state is reached, workflow sets the state of the exception to closed. So this is a policy exception flow. Generate final approvals for policy exception. If exception is raised from within GRC and there is no verification rule or approval rule set up, then the exception will be processed using only the approval flow. So if the verification rule is not there, then directly it will process using approval flow. There is a step-in flow to identify approvers by setting the owners of CIs that are impacted on the exception. Policy exception can also be raised from non-GRC apps such as HR, vulnerability response, and so on. For that, you need to create an integration registry for that. So lifecycle is new. Integration registry users can require policy action directly from SNAPs, which are routed to compliance manager. Any user with SNGRC business user can request a policy exception from employee center. Substate pending verification rules to verify accuracy and completeness of policy exception request. Then there is analyze, risk rating determined during analyze state. Compliance manager can choose to add impacted controls, approve request, review, request more information, or request approval. In review state, request or request manager can submit more information in comments tab. Compliance manager reviews it, and then awaiting approval. Policy exception request is set to control owners and request managers uh, unless approval rules are created, and then approved. Exceptions can be approved by compliance manager. Control owner can request for an extension. And close, compliance manager can manually close exception. So control objective, just two states, inactive and active. It follows policy record lifecycle and can be associated with more than one policy, can scope with entities only when active, create controls automatically when enabled, serves as template for generating control records, can be related to other template records, test templates, indicate templates, performance analytics templates. We'll talk about the compliance code calculation in next video. Thank you.